Good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Nelson, and I'm a professor in the biology department, and I'm also Associate Dean of Graduate Education in the Faculty of Science. On behalf of the Dean and the whole Faculty of Science, I'd like to welcome you today to the 31st edition of Soup and Science. Before we begin, we acknowledge that McGill University is on land which long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous people whose footsteps have marked this territory and on which peoples of the world now gather. Today we have four incredible speakers who will be presenting to you about their research. We have from the Department of Chemistry, Marc-André Légaré. We have a student speaker from Physiology and Mathematics, Anthony Quint. From the Department of Biology, we have Sarah Woolley, and from the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences, we have Professor Djordje Romanic. Once the presentations are finished, we're going to move into the question and answer portion of the session. Each speaker will be assigned to a breakout room, and you will be able to choose which room or rooms you want to visit, and you'll be able to join these breakout rooms on your own. A few minutes before noon, we will return to the main session for final remarks and wrap up. We will now begin with our first presenter, Professor Marc-André Légaré.
Hi, thank you for the invitation and for the introduction. So I'm from the Department of Chemistry here at McGill University, and one special component or one special aspect of our chemistry department here at McGill is that it's probably the first department of chemistry in Canada to have really made a concrete plan to put green chemistry at the center of its research efforts. And so as part of this plan to really favor green chemistry, 1 out of 2 or 3 or 4 faculty hires have to be green chemists. And I'm the latest, basically, of these hires in green chemistry. I started here at McGill in August 2020, and I will tell you a little bit about what interests my research group in terms of green chemistry. So when we talk about green chemistry, we're really talking about the effort to make chemistry as a science and as an industrial approach to be more sustainable. But we also are not just talking about a abstract idea. We're really talking about clear principles to reach that goal. And in fact, green chemistry is generally centered around 12 principles. And one of them that really ties a lot of other principles together is the idea of catalysis, which means to take small amounts of molecules or materials that don't get consumed in a chemical process, but that will activate, enable, or guide the chemical process. And this is extremely powerful for green chemistry because it allows us to activate sustainable sources of chemicals, like the biomass, for example. It allows us to reduce the amount of energy that we need to do in reactions. It allows us to do new reactions, so skip synthetic steps and really make a whole synthesis less wasteful. One challenge that we have in catalysis, though, is that nowadays, when we think about catalysts, and especially in organic chemistry, which is more my field, we think about catalysts that are made from these elements. So elements that we find in the middle of the periodic table, in what we call the transition metals. And we often think especially of catalysts that are made from heavy elements. And from a sustainability standpoint, this is an issue because these elements are extremely rare naturally. So if we look at the periodic table where space is given to each element according to their abundance in nature, we find that these heavy transition metals occupy very little space. They're really rare. And in terms of sustainability, this is a problem. On the one hand, their extraction from natural resources is polluting. On the other, they have to be imported. So they're just mined in a few select places around the world. So if we want to use them in Canada, we have to ship them basically over large distances. But more than that, they're also very precious. We're talking about platinum, rhodium, iridium, elements that cost a lot of money. So if you make a sustainable technology based on those elements, you'll have a much harder time to have the industry, the chemical industry, actually adopt them. So what my group is trying to do is use those elements, the ones that are really taking a lot of space on this periodic table, the earth-abundant non-metal elements and turn them into potent catalysts. Now, why is that not standard? Why is there a challenge associated to that? The fact is that transition metals are great for chemistry because they have a unique electronic environment around each transition metal atom. So these atoms often come with an electron cloud that includes empty, so vacant orbitals, and filled orbitals being electronic regions. And so these regions, electron-rich and electron-poor, negatively charged and positively charged, can act together on substrates to break bonds in molecules, form bonds, and do the processes that are vital for catalysis. By contrast, the main group elements are often either electron-rich or electron-poor, but not both at the same time like the transition metals. So how can we use them in catalysis? Some approaches that I've worked with before my time in McGill include combining electron-rich and electron-poor elements so that although they're not like transition metals individually, together they can act together on molecules and activate substrate and catalyze reaction. And so we've published a process that allows for the direct and really mild functionalization of CH bond in organic molecules. And this is a process that we can do on kilogram scale, and that has no other waste than hydrogen as a byproduct. We do it without solvent, we do it in kilogram scale. So here we see a picture of a reaction being done on a kilogram of compound. And we see that the reaction actually occurs really with involvement of two elements on the same molecule. The competing technology would use one atom, but an atom of iridium. So one molecule with the active site being on one atom. Another approach that we've been working with is engineering the orbitals of transition metals to make them directly mimic transition metals. And so we've used this approach to turn boron, which is a light main group element, into the first non-metal element to ever react with dinitrogen. And so we found that we can bind dinitrogen, we can reduce it, we can transform it to ammonia at a boron center, whereas usually before that, only metals were known to react with dinitrogen. Finally, this approach allowed us to discover new reactivity of dinitrogen because we found that boron was able to couple more than one equivalent of dinitrogen into a chain of nitrogen atoms, something that transition metals were not known to do. And so now that not only transition metals are able to react with dinitrogen, we're not only replacing transition metals, but we're also discovering new reactivity that was not known before when we were limited to transition metals. And so thank you for your attention. I will finish here. I would be glad to talk more about what we are going to do next year at McGill in the Légaré group. I will be happy to talk about this in the breakout rooms. Thank you.
And thank you for that very interesting talk. We'll move right away now to our next speaker, Anthony Quint from Physiology and Mathematics.
Okay, all right, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Quint, and I'm a U3 Physiology and Mathematics student here at McGill. And today I'll be talking about my project on mathematical modeling of calcium signals in bone cells, which are also called osteoblasts. An important part of human physiology relates to our capacity to deal with injuries, from the little cuts you receive on the playground to jamming your knee into your desk after spending a few too many hours studying on Zoom. But nonetheless, the human body must have the capacity to be able to recognize these sort of injuries and transmit the information throughout the body. My project focuses on wound healing in bone cells, which are also called osteoblasts. The transition of events usually goes as follows. You receive some sort of injury. These cells, and cause to the injury, will release ATP molecules, which is the energy molecule of the body. This ATP molecule can act as a sort of stimulus for certain receptors on these osteoblasts or bone cells, and this causes a calcium signal to be produced within the cell. The more specific goal of my project is to try to model these calcium signals that you see here in order to have a better idea of what happens on a cellular basis. Speaking of modeling, what is the role of mathematical modeling? So the idea of creating mathematical models is to explore physiological mechanisms and ultimately give you the ability to make predictions without necessarily having to be in person and run these physical experiments, which in some cases could be challenging or just impossible. So the general idea of modeling is you want to be analyzing your data, based on your data, you want to fit some sort of mathematical model that accurately describes it. You want to use this model to run some simulations, and then with these simulations, you can make some predictions, and hopefully these could be verified experimentally as well. Here I begin with the first step I mentioned before, which is to analyze data. So what I first began off with here was a wide assortment of calcium signals. And the first thing we decided to do is to try to cluster them together into groups of where they look the most similar to each other. And this is called a clustering analysis. An important part of these curves that I was trying to capture specifically is what I call these sort of superimposed oscillations. So on top of the curves, on top of the general shape here, you can sort of see these high frequency, low amplitude sort of oscillations on top of the curves. And some of the clusters have this feature, and some of them don't. So I won't go into too many details about my model, but the general idea with these sort of mathematical models that are based off ODEs is you have many parameters that model some sort of concentration per time, and this concentration per time can be increased by certain fluxes that increase it, and different fluxes that go out of it. For example, if we just look at the calcium over here, we can see that one of the fluxes that increases it is through this specific receptor here, where calcium can flux inwards. So the general prediction of my model and in terms of what causes the superimposed oscillations. So I decided to create this sort of compartmentalization in the model, where here what I call the shell compartment is a local region near the plasma membrane. And the idea is, because you have so much calcium activity near the cell membrane with all these certain receptors, you get a very highly dynamic and very fast region where calcium concentration varies very rapidly. And because of this, we predict that this is ultimately what causes these sort of oscillations. And now the next step is to run the simulations and make your predictions. So I won't go into too many details about the results, but the general idea of what we can see here, if I can point you to this figure here, is that indeed we can kind of see that in the shell compartment, the calcium dynamics are indeed very, very fast, and they also have a very, very high concentration. And ultimately, it is these sort of dynamics which produce the superimposed oscillations on top of the curves, which at least is what our prediction is. So I won't go into too many ideas, too much into the future directions, but if you'd like to ask more in the group meetings, I'd be glad to discuss them. And for acknowledgements, I'd like to thank everyone in the Amar Cadgels lab for all the help they give me, and also to the Camera lab for supplying the raw data. And thank you very much for allowing me to present today.
Thank you. That was great, and a great example for maybe prospective students who are listening today to see what a student research project can look like. It's really fantastic. Okay, our next speaker will be Sarah Woolley from the Department of Biology.
Hi, I'm going to share my screen. Oops. Great. Okay. I'm Sarah Woolley from the Department of Biology, and my lab studies songbirds, including examples of these birds here, which are present here in Montreal basically all year round. So there's over 4,000 species of songbirds, and what's interesting about them is that they actually have to learn the vocalizations that they produce. So there's not a lot of animals that do that sort of vocal learning. So songbirds do, whales and dolphins, hummingbirds, bats, parrots, elephants, and us humans. But that's a pretty limited list. And what's interesting about the way that songbirds learn their vocal signals is that it's very similar to the way that we humans learn how to speak. So what happens is that when they're young, they listen to the song of their father or their tutor while they're in the nest. So this little guy here. And then they memorize that example of song. And then they go through a period of vocal practice, where basically they refine their own vocalizations to try to get them to match the song that they memorized when they were little. And then finally, as an adult, they can produce a really nice copy of the song that they memorized when they were young. Now, in the birds that I study, which are zebra finches, males use these songs to attract and impress girls. And so female songbirds don't learn song, but they do use song in order to recognize different male individuals and to select mates. But despite the fact that they don't need to learn to produce a song, they do need to learn the auditory signals when they're young. So females form sort of preferences for particular songs. They might like songs or dislike them or feel sort of indifferent to them. But in order to have those preferences, females have to hear songs when they're young. They have to go through the same period of auditory learning. In the same way that hearing language when we're young sort of tunes our auditory system to respond to particular language sounds, female birds go through that same sort of process where hearing song when they're young will tune up their auditory system so that they can respond properly to auditory signals. So we study sort of auditory learning and plasticity, auditory memory, so the ability to recognize individuals based on the sounds that they make, and auditory preferences, so what kinds of songs females like. And we look at both how this is shaped by their developmental auditory experience, so how it's shaped by the sounds that they hear when they're young, and also how it's affected by the kinds of social and mating interactions that they have as adults. And we're particularly interested in the role of the neurotransmitter dopamine in this. So we think that dopamine is really important for helping to set up the auditory system in young birds, and also for females to form preferences for songs when they're adults. And yeah, so I'm happy to chat more about all of these examples in the breakout rooms afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you, that was great. Our final speaker before the breakout rooms is Djordje Romanic from the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences.
Hello, everyone. My name is Djordje Romanic or Djordje Romanic. I come from Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences, and my research is mainly related to severe weather. Today, I will talk about thunderstorms and their link to sustainability and resilience. Here we have a video from Quebec. You will see how thunderstorm winds are sudden and abrupt. Now, there is no wind, maybe 5 meters per second, and in a matter of 30 seconds to 1 minute, the wind speed increases to more than 30 meters per second. Winds such as these inflict damage to environment, of course, people, as well as structures. In many parts of the world, including Canada, these types of winds are responsible for major damages. Here, we can see thunderstorm wind destroying a wind turbine. Truth to be told, this wind turbine was already damaged in terms of the braking system, but if there was no thunderstorm wind, it wouldn't explode like this. So in this slide, you see thunderstorm winds. On this slide, you see definition of sustainability and resilience. Sustainability, by definition, is meeting our needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And one of the main energy resources for sustainability is renewable energy and wind energy. Resilience, in terms of engineering and atmospheric sciences, has two bullet points. One is to minimize the impact of adverse weather, and the second one, if the damage due to adverse weather is inflicted, how can we recover and adapt quickly? Along these lines, my research on thunderstorm winds is related to climatology and forecasting of thunderstorms and their winds, their formation, dynamics, and turbulence, modeling, numerical, analytical, and physical, as you will see in the next slide, measurements in the atmosphere, real measurements using anemometers and radars and lidars, and wind structure interaction, which is directly related to resilience and sustainability. One of the ongoing research is interaction between thunderstorm outflows and surrounding atmospheric boundary layer winds. I have currently one master's student, very bright student, that is coupling these two flows and providing mathematical analytical model. I am also working on the triggering mechanism for thunderstorm winds, radar Doppler measurements of these winds in the atmosphere, and the interaction between thunderstorm outflows and urban environments. I'm getting a PhD students in September that will start working on that, but I'm looking for more students in that subject. In my research group, safety of the students is first place. I'm here. This is a thunderstorm wind tunnel. I am on the left. 2 colleagues from Italy are in the middle. And because thunderstorm wind is coming from right to left, we put a master student first. And I'm here on the left side. I'm just kidding. This is 5-6 meters per second winds, but you know, you never know what's going to happen. Thank you. This is all for me. You can visit my YouTube channel for where I promote science and atmospheric science in particular. You can email me, or you can visit my webpage at Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences. Thank you.